Okay, so we're going to move on to international and supranational organizations. This is one of my favorite parts of the course. So, an example of an international organization is the International Monetary Fund. That's pretty easy to remember. They both start with international. And then also the World Bank. Both of these exert great influence through preconditions for financial assistance. So they provide some kind of financial aid to countries. They're joined by member states that typically work for a common interest or goal. This is all international organizations. There's some kind of purpose that each organization has, and member states who want to follow through with that purpose/goal will join. So the International Monetary Fund, countries that want to help out with financial assistance or receive financial assistance will join the IMF. And you can also use the IMF as an abbreviation on your FRQs. So international organizations, the member countries are bound by rules and guidelines. They have to follow them or they cannot be members of them. And that can impact their sovereignty negatively. The overall goal of these international organizations, the common goal across all of them, is to build and promote a greater global community, kind of like having neighbors, sort of, and solve various problems. So, for just a broad example, countries that receive IMF assistance must agree to structural adjustment programs. And these programs require privatization of state-owned companies, so an economic liberalization policy, reduced tariffs, and reduced government subsidies of domestic industries. So let's go to the pros and cons of joining an international organization. So a pro can include more opportunity for global trade. What about building international relationships as you're interacting with these other countries? You can provide security and stability and earn economic aid and increase your development. Some cons can include free trade promotion that can hurt domestic businesses and industries as these other products are being brought in from other countries. There can be a potential loss of sovereignty as the states have to adhere to organization rules. Many may not treat other member states as equals. They may favor certain ones and dislike others. And because there's so many countries working together, there can be slow and inefficient decision making. So I talked prior about structural adjustment programs in the International Monetary Fund. We're going to go a little bit more in depth about what these programs actually entail. So the IMF manages exchange rates and provides loans to countries in need. Loans meaning the countries have to pay them back. Receiving loans does require agreements to put in and implement and enforce structural adjustment programs, SAP. And I don't think that's an abbreviation you should use on your FRQs. I would write out structural adjustment programs. I haven't actually seen it on the FRQs though. So it could be on there this year. You never know. They can also these programs call for reduced government spending. It calls for privatization of state-owned companies, and this promotes more capitalist/free market practices. And they can also call for the reduction of corruption of government-owned industries. But we saw prior in this lecture that privatization can also have some hands in corruption, depending on who actually is getting the organizations. So these programs also call for the elimination or at least reduction of tariffs that leads to more free trade. There's less taxes and barriers for countries to trade with one another. Also involve reducing government subsidies of domestic industries, and this encourage free trading capitalism as they're not giving it an extra leg, they're not being put on a pedestal. It's survival of the fittest in the economy, supply and demand working out. And this also reduces favoritism of domestic industries. So basically, the best ones will survive and prosper. It's kind of like a form of evolution. Reduce government spending, specifically on social services and welfare, such as education and social protection. Let's look at an example in Nigeria in 1986, a little bit ago, but still kind of contemporary. So this was a response to economic challenges, like a decline in the oil prices. Remember, oil is such a big part of their economy that if it goes down, their economy is going to suffer. And they were also accumulating significant external debt. The currency was devalued to boost exports and attract foreign direct investment. They had trade liberalization to reduce trade barriers and tariffs to promote international trade. So these policies are really hammering in, boosting trade and interaction with other countries through increased export, increasing FDI, and increasing imports to really facilitate real trade. They also privatized or started the privatization of state-owned enterprises to increase efficiency of these enterprises and attract private investment. This could be foreign private investment too, not just domestic. They also implemented policies to reduce government intervention and bureaucratic obstacles in various sectors to make for more quick and easy, efficient decision making and action. Also, as well, they put in cuts to public spending and subsidies. This is kind of to limit their debt. They put in what's called austerity measures, and they led some economic improvements. But overall, they increased poverty, inequality, and inflation. So not all the time will these structural adjustment programs lead to immediate positive effects. Sometimes it could get worse before it gets better. But these are the major effects that economists have seen after Nigeria implemented these programs. Russia put in structural adjustment programs as well, and this is referred to as shock therapy. So the dissolution of the USSR in 91 left Russia in kind of an economic state that they didn't really want to be in. They were in a turmoil state with hyperinflation, where purchasing power for individuals was decreasing dramatically, and there was a very high need to transition to a more capitalist economy. So they put in a more open and market-driven trade system. They reduced trade barriers, and they also let the prices be determined by the market. And this is, in simple terms, supply and demand in action. They had massive privatization of state-owned enterprises and assets. They reduced government intervention and bureaucracy in the economy to lead to more efficient and less government-involved processes. There were also efforts to stabilize the currency and control the inflation and bring back that purchasing power. They also put in fiscal policies. Fiscal policies deal with government spending, and they also wanted to address budget deficits. And overall, this led to rapid economic transformation like that. An increased FDI and the emergence of the private sector, however, is associated with a rise in poverty for certain groups, inequalities in the economy, and the concentration of wealth, kind of tying back to that inequality. So you could probably predict that their Gini index score was not helped with the structural adjustment programs. So we're going to talk about tariffs a little bit, the pros and cons of tariffs. So again, I've said this before, but a tariff is a tax or a duty that is paid on a particular class of imports or exports. They typically cause for less trade, rather more trade, because that's just less taxes you have to pay if you don't have tariffs in place. So a pro of tariffs, it is a source of government revenue. The government's going to pocket the money. There's also a bolstering of domestic industry as international industry and trade is not promoted. So domestic industry and business is going to be promoted the most because they don't have to pay the tariffs. They're already within the country. They're not being imported or exported. And this could lead to greater employment opportunities and protection of these industries and of jobs. It also can address trade imbalances. So they can limit trade with other countries if it's becoming too heavy, or they can promote it. Cons could be that consumer prices increase if you add in tariffs because international goods may cost more, especially because of that transportation. They could also cause a global supply chain disruption as you have another step in that supply chain. It can be less efficient and take longer or unbalanced. And it can also limit international trade, again, because you don't want to pay those taxes, and grow market distortion. All right, so we talked about international organizations. Now we're going to talk about supranational organizations, and this encompasses a concept known as supranationalism. So supranational organizations, if you're asked to define it, you will say that it's an organization that has national governments as members with its own sovereign powers over member states. So typically we could have like a board or a committee that's kind of the head oversight of these organizations. Not everyone is an equal member. There could be 10 countries on the board or committee that oversee the entire organization, pass policy, address the goals and issues of the supranational organization. Like the United Kingdom and United States and China, they're chairs on the United Nations, for example. So, with that being said, there are certain pros and cons of a country being in a supranational organization. So, a pro includes cooperation being encouraged between member states, being forced to interact. This could be economic cooperation through open borders or diplomatic cooperation. It would also prevent future conflicts between member states. And it also can lead to one having more influence in the world affairs and pressuring others. And we'll come back to that. They could also give up sovereignty. There's pressure on leaders and political parties within these countries to meet certain demands of the organizations. And not all the policies or the goals or agendas are going to align with what the needs and wants of the country are going to be. The citizens may disagree, and this can ultimately lead to countries leaving organizations, like in Brexit, where the United Kingdom left the European Union. So let's look at the World Trade Organization. So for the World Trade Organization, increases international trade between member states. I think that's pretty easy for you to remember. The World Trade Organization promotes trade. Okay, good. It promotes fairness and transparency in trade, so nobody's gypping anyone, and everyone knows what they're getting and what they have to give up. They oversee trade agreements, and they also attempt to make trade easier. They will lower or eliminate these tariff taxes. And import substitution policies. This is pretty important. It's kind of similar to a little branch like our SAPs. So industrialization policies that attempt to support domestic business and reduce foreign dependency are import substitution policies. So they are limiting your imports rather than promoting them to influence and expand domestic production and growth. So they can do this by raising tariffs. If you increase those taxes, those other countries aren't going to want to export their goods to your countries. And if you're getting confused when I'm saying import and export is to give away, import is to obtain. These policies can encourage production of local industrialized products, so goods and services produced in domestic factories. Or it can also encourage purchase of local products by citizens, farmers markets. There you go. So they can be cheaper than foreign products. There's a lack of transportation costs, especially, that will lead to these cheaper costs for goods and services. It can also increase performance and competition of local businesses and industries within the countries. It won't increase foreign competition, but it can increase domestic competition, and this can result into domestic job growth and an increasing employment rate. However, it can lead to less innovation and could produce substandard production as well. And it also may take away sources of government revenue, such as from the custom duties, the taxes that are paid on the tariffs. Yes, the government can tax the businesses as well, but it may not be as much as they can earn from the tariffs. Just examples of, not organizations, but import substitution policy. So that would be Brexit. So Brexit that really focused on the United Kingdom's domestic conditions, and NAFTA, which really focused on Mexico's production and their exports. So let's do a little in-depth analysis here of the European Union. This is kind of important for you to know. So one of the main goals of the European Union is to open borders for trade of movement and establish an internal market between the European continent and the countries within it. It promotes sustainable development based on balanced economic growth and price stability, as well as having a highly competitive market economy, capitalism, with full employment and social progress. So with that being said, we're going to see a larger market of goods with this open trade across a variety of dozens of countries. So you could have goods and services produced in France and Germany and Denmark and in the Netherlands. They also have a common currency, which is the euro. In the United Kingdom, they use the pound. It also improves trade with lower transaction costs. So that can cause for more trade to occur as the cost to trade is lower. It's kind of like if you have taxes to trade, tariffs, it's going to reduce trade. It also attempts to combat social exclusion between the other countries and discrimination. That's particularly done through these open border policies. They also hope to protect and improve the quality of the environment, and this contributes to European solidarity and European culture and economic system between the whole continent. They're not every country in Europe, like United Kingdom, for example, is part of the EU, but they hope to expand that and unify a lot of Europe through this organization. So there are some pros and cons to supranationalism, as we discussed, and there's some pros and cons specifically to the European Union and the euro specifically. So we're going to look at the euro, which is the common currency. So a pro to the euro is that there are lower transaction costs. Having this common currency is going to lower the transaction costs between goods and services between the countries, because everyone's going to have the same currency. There's no exchange rates to worry about and currency depreciation between currencies. Yeah, between foreign currencies. You can have common monetary policy through the European Central Bank, which is part of the European Union, and this will lead to price stability. So you can have common monetary policy because everyone's using the same currency, so everyone can be affected the same way. Can be done in a uniform manner. It can stimulate trade and flourishing foreign investment. It can promote it. And it also is a symbol of European unity because every country is going to have this, and it'll integrate the economies. Now, there are some cons, like obviously having sovereignty issues over currency and economic policy. Sometimes the government within a country may want to enact a monetary or fiscal economic policies, but it may not coincide well with the currency of the euro. It can also lead to a loss of control over interest rates within the countries, as so many other countries are going to be using and affecting this currency. And it can also devalue the currency as well. Economies, in some cases, may be better off without the euro, and that's what many in the UK suspected during the Brexit era. And this would be due to countries having different economic cycles, having different policies in place, or wanting to put in place. They could have more diverse or less diverse economies with different goods and services that make up a different portion of their GDP. No economy is the same between two countries. It also can just vary because of the market needs and the public opinion, which is just another word for demand. Now, the UK, for the most part, did not fit in the EU. Let's explain why. So it wasn't an original member. It wasn't a founder of the European Union. And the UK, as we see in history, it likes to take charge. It likes to be the one doing all the action and being self-sufficient. And it was never colonized. It was never ruled by another entity for the most part of history. It was the one doing all the ruling. It also didn't adopt the euro during its time in the organization. So they didn't have that unifying feature during their membership. They also opted out from a lot of the borderless travel policies and the common asylum and immigration policies. So they didn't even follow through with the uniform policy making. They also chose not to participate fully in certain initiatives related to criminal justice and law enforcement. So really, what you should be taking away from this is that the EU passed all these measures, and the UK is like, no, we're not going to do that. And it's easy for them to kind of opt out of the borderless travel and common asylum policies because they're an island. They're not even connected to mainland Europe. It also opted out, who would have thought, of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And they had varying policies regarding issues like working hours and employment rights. And that's a very economic policy that varied between them and the rest of the EU. So there's a lot of criticism that occurred within the United Kingdom of the EU, and I guess vice versa. They viewed the European Union as undemocratic. The European Commission is not directly elected by the citizens of the member states. They're actually elected, the president is actually elected by the European Council. So they could see that, oh, there's no direct elections for these officials. That's not democratic at all. And they wanted to, be democratic. They claimed there was a bloated bureaucracy. So, for example, there were multiple institutions, such as the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the European Council, that led to inefficiency and slow decision-making policies and just processes. It also enabled more immigration to the UK, which raised concerns over public services, as well as culture as well. The euro didn't even meet the 5 critical tests that the UK has that would have found it necessary to adopt its use. And the EU as a whole was seen as elitist and uncaring to the UK citizens. It was seen as more of a solution to more broad and widespread economic goal instead of very specific. And obviously, if you're in the UK, you want your economy to do well. How other economies do, while it is very important that they do well, you don't care how they do that much. So this came about, the Independence Party came about in the 21st century, and it had a big goal that we're going to see here. So, the Independence Party was the spark of growing citizen participation in the 21st century. It was anti-European Union. That's very important. It was seen as a fringe party, and it actually clashed with the 2 other major parties, the Labour and Conservative parties. They didn't even like each other. They gained a lot of support across the country. They weren't initially successful, but they had to get there through their platforms. And they started to win some legislative seats in the House of Commons. And their EU anti-focus really grew with this prominence. And they gained a platform that led to a referendum vote, where, remember, the citizens vote, on whether the European Union and the UK part ways. And it ultimately led to the UK leaving the EU, as we know. And that process was referred to as Brexit. Brexit! So in 2016, that's when this referendum vote occurred, which occurred years before they actually left the EU. And remember, you know this, a referendum is a direct vote by the electorate on a proposal, law, or political issue. Electorate is just, citizens. And they're not voted on by a representative. So, for the most part, most of the Labour, Conservative, and Liberal Democrats, the major parties in the UK, voted to stay. And the Independence Party voted to leave. And this populist movement led to them having a very, very narrow victory. 51% of the referendum votes voted to leave. However, you can't say, oh, it's so narrow, we should just discard it. No. At 51%, that's majority. They're going to leave the European Union now. The Prime Minister, David Cameron, resigned in disgrace as a result. The successor Prime Minister resigned as well because they couldn't execute a proper and sufficient leave plan. So the UK was in a heavy debate over how to move forward, how to have a sustainable economy, how to actually leave the European Union. And they didn't leave until 4 years later in the beginning of 2020. And this graph itself, there's a lot of flaws to it because the United Kingdom left in the beginning of 2020. Guess what else happened in 2020? There was a global pandemic that negatively affected the world economy. So we can kind of guess how they would recover outside of being in the European Union, but we can't really look at the 2020 statistics and try to isolate Brexit as a cause for any conditions because COVID is also in play here. So we're going to kind of see here that there's been multiple dips in the UK economy, and that's pretty normal. Every country's had some multiple dips here. We can't really isolate any of these variables to Brexit. And that kind of ties back to what we learned in Unit 1, where correlation, yes, the economy did go down after they left the EU, but correlation doesn't mean causation. All right, let's move on from the European Union. We're done talking about that for now. And let's move on to ECOWAS, which is primarily in Western Africa. So what country are we going to talk about? I wonder. So this is the Economic Community of West African States. Their goal is to build and promote economic integration and cooperation with member states. Again, they just want to boost those economies, make money, make some profits, that sort of thing. Nigeria is the most populous country in West Africa, and they also have the largest economy within the region. They're growing pretty well, actually, compared to the other countries. And its economic strength gives it considerable influence within ECOWAS because people are going to look at them and say, you know what you're doing. Nigeria also has contributed troops and resources for peacekeeping purposes. They have a very strong and active military as well. So we can kind of see a more diplomatic role of the organization as well. Kind of like, I have your back, guys, because we're in this organization. It's a little networking scheme. The country has used its economic resources, such as oil, as a tool for diplomacy and negotiation, and this has influenced regional Western African policies and initiatives. Now, there is not a common currency in West Africa. There has been discussion of a common currency, the ECO, however you want to say it. And that, we'll see how that goes, actually. There's a lot of pros and cons to common currency, as we talked about earlier. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It's free, which means it costs $0, and it really does help me out. Leave a comment down below with any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. There's some links down below in the description with practice tests, key terms, guided notes, all that fun stuff. Head on over to the next AP Comparative video on some really cool political stuff.